Hey guys, Stealth here. Welcome to the War Room. Today we got quite a lot to discuss, as I've been reading quite a few new things, most of which, or most important of which, is a book by Neil Strauss. Now, if you've read a book called The Game, then you might be familiar with the name. Neil Strauss is the author of The Game, and another book, or actually a few other books, I believe most of which I have read. One of them is Emergency, and that's where I believe I first heard about Neil Strauss. It's a book about where he goes into the, let's say, the survivalist scene, or what to do in case of disaster. Very, very good book, and he goes very deep into this stuff. He goes so far as what to do when all hell breaks loose, such as having a second passport to make sure you can still travel outside the country. Anyway, pretty far down the rabbit hole, that one. Definitely a good read. Then I started reading, and I believe I never finished it, The Game, which is a book of his about how to pick up women. Not that I needed to at the particular moment when I was reading it, but one of my friends recommended it. Not so much in the sense of picking up women, but as a sort of recommendation on how to use psychology and how you can make the best use of that. Definitely another interesting book, except that, at least for me, towards the end of the book, it just goes completely off the rails. He just, I don't know, he completely loses it in the sense of his whole life is coming apart, and that's when I stopped reading, because I found that so depressing that I just stopped. Anyway, recently he came out with a new book, which is called The Truth About Relationships. This is, I'm not going to say a sequel, but it definitely has to do with the game. Because during the game he learned how to pick up women, and from his words, he slept with hundreds of them. And he got so damn good at it that he had a sort of almost compulsive need to start cheating. When he felt that he wasn't getting enough sex, he just immediately went towards other women, picked up, I believe, the best friend of his girlfriend at the time, and let's just say that his girlfriend's current didn't really appreciate that. That's a book that I'm reading right now, and it's not just about his story, but also about how, let's say, how society deals with relationships, which is, for me, a very, very interesting topic, because, again, it's psychology based, and there's all sorts of psychology that we may not be fully aware of that is influencing our decisions. Such as, and that's one of the points that he describes in the book, why would cheating on someone immediately class as a loss of trust? Why would that be the case? Now, I'm not saying that this is something that I have ever been involved in, nor am I likely to be so. But it is interesting in the sense of, why do we have this idea that the one must exist with the other, or the one must not exist without the other? Another thing that he came up with, or that he wrote in the book that I found very interesting was, okay, look, let's say relationship is what you, or should be about what you both want. So it should be about the, let's say, the good time that you want to be having together, not about what you both don't want each other to have. That would be unusual, wouldn't it? And in this case, of course, that is cheating and or sex with another person outside the relationship. So all of these questions are being asked in the book, and he ends up in rehab, being treated for sex addiction. Now, the sex addiction definition of the people in the rehab clinic is, as far as I'm concerned, a bit extreme. They go so far as to say that if you think about women sexually, then you must have sex addiction. I don't know about you guys, but I think that goes a bit too far. That is too stern of a definition for me. Because, let's face it, aren't we just like biologically programmed to think like that? Aren't we biologically programmed to procreate? So, yeah, all of those questions and more being asked and not quite yet answered in the book that I'm reading right now. It's The Truth About Relationships by Neil Strauss. Highly, highly recommend it. Really, really nice read. And not just a nice read, but also really funny in the way that he writes about this stuff. He's quite sarcastic, or can be quite sarcastic. And I've also found that he doesn't mind taking the shit out of himself, or taking the piss out of himself. He just doesn't really seem to take a lot of stuff serious. While it is definitely a very, very serious topic, and what he's going through is indeed quite serious. So if you have a couple hours to spare, and you do want to have a good read, then I would definitely recommend that book, because for me it is very, very interesting. It's very, very much of a good read. So by all means, go for it. Other things that I have been up to. Last week I talked about From the Depths and how that got me into the flow state, which means that you basically forget or lose all sense of time, and before you know it, you'll have spent hours and hours and hours on this one game. A couple of you replied to that with other games that gave you this, let's say, this feeling of flow. And one of the games that someone else mentioned was Kerbal Space Program. Yep, absolutely, I have the same thing. That's also one of those rare games that can do that. Now, there is, let's say, a flip side to flow, which I would say is addiction. Now, it again depends on how you would define addiction. But the addiction cycle, and I'll look this up, I do my homework before I make this this specific type of video. The addiction cycle, and I'm leaving out a few steps, pretty much looks like this. You start fantasizing about something, and this could be basically anything. It could be along the lines of you start fantasizing about women. You could start fantasizing about what it's like to use drugs, what it's like to do, well, X, Y, and Z. In my case, it was a bit more, how shall I put it, mundane. When I'm playing World of Warships, I'm looking at the ships and I'm thinking, could I design this in From the Depths? And how would I build these turrets? And how would I build this ship? And would it be well armored? And how soon would I be able to get this thing to flip over? And then you start basically obsessing about it. That's the second step. You go into this state where all you can think about is that specific game, or all you can think about is that specific situation. And you're barely able to do anything else. You're barely able to control yourself. In my case, I was barely playing anything else. I was so obsessed with playing From the Depths that was basically all I did. And I could get up at, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning, do a bit of work, start playing at 3, come off at 12. So I'd have about 8 to 9 hours pretty much non-stop playing that game. Now, some people would say that's probably not an addiction. Well, maybe. But for me, that was definitely signified as a sort of loss of control, which is another step of the addiction cycle. Loss of control. You just cannot help yourself. Then comes the guilt, and this usually happened for me when I was doing or brushing my teeth at night, and I was going, oh crap. Yeah, I just spent another 9 hours playing that game, whereas I should have been calling new clients, building my business, working on blogs, working on newsletters, whatever. And then comes the frustration, either with yourself or with the fact that you are denying yourself access to the thing that you feel that you really, really need. And this, again, leads pretty much back to fantasizing. So you get frustrated with whatever it is you're doing, and then you go, well, yeah, you know what, fuck it, my business isn't going anywhere either. It's not working anyways, so I might as well start playing From the Depths. And I'll just play for, I don't know, half hour. Yeah. No. Loss of control. Doesn't work. No such thing as playing half an hour. And then you're back to the start. So this is just a few steps of this cycle of addiction. I'm not saying it's the only model for addiction, but it got me to think that it's really, really close to the way that From the Depths have been impacting me. And it's pretty close to the flow state. These things I'm not going to say they overlap, but they have certain elements that are definitely close together. And this is something that you do need to be on the lookout for. Besides, I don't think that there'd be the first person who'd have game addiction, or I'd be the first person to have game addiction. I definitely believe that I'd be susceptible to that. And it's always been a struggle to try and keep it under control, not to have it take over my entire life. But let me know what that is like with you guys. Do you have pretty much unlimited time to spend on gaming? Do you limit yourself? Do you have others who limit you? Girlfriends, wives, parents, whatever? Roommates? I've known quite a few people who have roommates who just either shut off the internet because they want to sleep, or people who just aren't allowed to play beyond a certain time because they find that making or using TeamSpeak is getting too loud, and that is a sort of artificial boundary on the amount of time that you can spend gaming. But let me know what that is like for you. Do you have any specific games that you think are risking an addiction? That are getting close to pushing you over the edge of spending way too much time on the games and not enough time on, let's say, the real life stuff? And if so, which games are that? Now, as you may have been seeing, I'm currently playing World of Warships, and that is pretty much the next object that I wanted to talk about. This, what you're looking at, is the Otago Tier 8 cruiser. The ship that you just saw was another cruiser, the Molotov. And what I found is that, and I mentioned this in one of the earlier war rooms, the 80-20 rule means that 80% of your results usually come from 20% of your causes. And this means that, for example, I believe that 80% of my win rate comes from 20% of my ships, or 20% of the type of my ships, which is basically aircraft carriers. I usually do very, very well on aircraft carriers, and that's something that I will be showing off on Wednesday. Now, I started playing cruisers lately, and I found that I am just nowhere near as capable in cruisers as I am in the other types of ships. And it's not a bad thing. You could say that, well, maybe you have to learn. This is not something that comes natural to most people, especially positioning is something that is very, very important in a cruiser. And maybe I shouldn't be playing this class, but, I do want to try and diversify the type of ship that I can play. But it is frustrating as all hell, because you want to do good. You want to be able to get a lot of damage in. This game so far has been going on for 4 minutes, and I still haven't done a single scrap of damage. Now, hopefully that's going to change when I hit this Kuchezov, but we basically, and this is also something that's going on at the office, you basically get promoted into incompetency. I think this is another concept that I've talked about previously. You get promoted to the fact that, or to the point where you can no longer do your job, let's say, as good as you did before, or with as much satisfaction as you got before. So that, for example, you work as a sales guy. And you're very, very good at that. You're very good at trying to sell stuff. And you get a lot of sales, your boss is happy, your management is happy, and after a while you get promoted. Then, you get promoted to, let's say, senior sales, where you get bigger clients. Again, you keep your clients happy, you make more sales, your bonuses go up, you get, again, more reputation inside the company, and you get another promotion. And at this point, you are being made responsible for, let's say you're being made responsible for training. Which isn't a bad thing, but you're a sales guy, you're not specifically a trainer. It doesn't mean that you cannot do it, it just means that you might not be as good at doing it as you were just doing the sheer sales. And then, a little while later, you find yourself again being promoted because it turns out you're a pretty decent trainer, and you're promoted into a manager. Now, nice and all to have another promotion and to have an even bigger paycheck, but can you still be an effective manager? is that something that you find yourself to be good at? And if the answer is no, then two things are likely to happen. One, you suddenly don't get as much job satisfaction simply because you're not as good at your job as you were when you were a simple sales manager, or let's say a simple sales guy. Second, you're not going to get promoted anymore because all of a sudden you're not doing a job that is as good as people were expecting from you. You just don't get the same results. You don't find that you go to work as happily as you did before, and you just go, okay, I'll do my job, but I don't really like it, and that shows. And again, you no longer get promoted. So you get promoted into incompetency, let's say into the role of sales manager, where you're directing a team of sales guys or salespeople, and that's where you stop, because you're not exactly competent for the function or for the job that you have. Doesn't mean you cannot do it, just doesn't mean that you might not be the perfect candidate for the job. And this will show. Now this, I believe, is pretty much the same thing with World of Warships. Although World of Warships lacks that ceiling. It lacks the you're getting promoted into incompetency, because at some point you will reach tier 10. Despite of your actions. You might be incompetent as holy hell. And let's face it, in World of Tanks, World of Warships, we have some people who are not quite as competent as you would like them to be at the higher tiers. And then there's the feature of high tier premium ships, which you can just buy on the gift shop. Or the premium shop, as they call it nowadays. And you go, yeah, well, I'll just buy my way up to tier 8. Which may seem nice and all, because you suddenly have a fancy ship, but if you just started playing tier 3, and you find yourself being dropped into a tier 8 game, then you basically promoted yourself into incompetency. Now, the long-winded point I'm trying to make here is that I find that I might be selling all of my cruisers, save for the premiums that is, because I'm just not as good. Both the 80-20 rule and the promoted into incompetency rule basically come into play here. Because on the one hand, I'm just not as good. I don't get as much damage out in a cruiser as I do in a destroyer or an aircraft carrier. And at the same time, I find that I don't enjoy it as much. So I basically promoted myself into incompetency. And this is something that I hope you guys could be wary of as well. If you are offered a promotion, which I really hope happens, then be very wary if that is the promotion that you really want. Is that something that's going to really help you? Is that something that you find that you would be happier with or without? And I think it was a couple of months ago that I said, well, I stopped playing battleships altogether, and immediately I was about 10 times happier in this game. And I basically haven't touched battleships since. I think played a game once or twice, but I thought, no, this just isn't working. Screw it. I'm not going to spend my time trying to improve my capabilities as a battleship player. I'm just not going to be playing battleships anymore altogether. And then I'm getting real close to having the same thing about cruisers. Now, as always, I try to make this thing applicable to real life as much as possible. If you find yourself with a promotion or with something that you may not feel that you're very good at, either embrace the suck, as I believe I described it last time. Understand that you're going to not be as good as people who've been doing it for weeks, months, ages, whatever. And, at the same time, ask yourself, is this something that you even want to try and get good at? Is playing cruisers an important part? Not really. Because for me, the point about playing this game is to have fun. Am I still having fun in a cruiser? Well, not as much. So, conclusion, probably won't be playing cruisers for much longer, because I simply don't do as well, and I'm not having as much fun as I normally do. So, how's that for a lot of psychology? Bit of a lighter topic. Movie I went to see last week, Bad Moms. Now you may be thinking that's a bit of a chick flick. Maybe, but it sure was a lot of fun. Definitely a very, very fun movie. Now, Bad Moms basically is about the struggles that, let's say, modern moms have nowadays, where they have to be absolutely bloody perfect. And at some point, they're going to rebel. They're going to say, no, screw it, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to be bad moms for a while. And that's what this movie is about. What happens when you do that? What happens when you make that decision? And does that make you happier? Does it impact anyone at all? And basically the underlying issue is, what kind of parent do you want to be? Now, that's not something I'm dealing with quite yet, although I am thinking about having kids at some point. But the real thing is that most of the time, and this is something that I've come to realize more and more, your parents probably barely knew what they were doing. They probably barely knew what they were getting themselves into. And that's something that most people don't really seem to realize. It's at some point you find out your parents aren't as perfect as you imagined them to be. You find out that they might not exactly be all of those admirable qualities that you always thought they had, that they aren't really that wise, or that they have flaws, that they have their own concerns, that they have their own worries. And again, this movie highlights that, as well as, of course, The Truth About Relationships, the book that I just mentioned. It is, again, making you realize that your parents don't have all the answers either. That they don't always know what they're talking about either. So, again, cut your parents some slack. If you find yourself getting upset with your parents, if you find yourself getting angry, just imagine that these are basically just people too. And that is perfectly okay. It's something that I've had to realize at some point. And I hope you do too. Now, as for the channel, not really that much going on with the channel as far as different things going on. Really not that much as far as developments. I don't have any information about when the new Nation Pack is going to arrive, when or if Wargame 4 is going to be developed. Just nothing. Eugen isn't telling me anything. I don't know how far the development of the Israeli Nation Pack or Deck Pack is. We're just going to have to wait and see. But it could be anywhere from, I don't know, knowing Eugen, I'd say anywhere from next week to the end of December. You just never know with these guys. So make sure that, or just adjust your realizations and your expectations. It might not be here as soon as you think, and just when you think, oh, well, it's going to be November, that's when they say, nope, it's pending, or it's imminent, as their famous phrase goes. Whereas imminent can still mean 2 weeks away. So we'll just have to wait and see. We'll just have to wait and find out. Now, what I have found as far as the channel goes lately is that Wargame is starting to feel a bit like a job. I have this upload schedule now with the tactical games and subscriber replays on Saturday, ranked on Friday, warships on Wednesday. Yeah, I believe that pretty much covers the whole week. And I find that sometimes I just get a bit bored with a wargame. I've played this game for so long, so many hours, that I am going to be cutting back in the amount of wargame that I'm covering. I know that will upset some of you. That's okay. But as long as I'm not having fun playing wargame, I cannot really put out good videos anyway. And I get pretty much requests every single day from people asking, hey, do you want to play a match together? And I'm like, well, I've already played a match, or I don't feel like playing a match. And this feeling of I don't feel like playing a match just gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm going to be cutting back on Wargame a little bit. I don't know exactly how I'm going to be executing that yet, but the Ranked series will probably stay, and the Tactical Tuesdays will probably stay. As for the rest, I'm not quite sure. And what game is going to be taking its place, again, I don't quite know yet. There is, of course, a new game, No Man's Sky. I have been keeping an eye on it, but from what I've seen and especially read lately, the game just, I don't know, it was released before it was done or something like that. It wouldn't load, it crashed. I believe that it only got a 30% positive review in the first couple of hours after it was launched. So yeah, well done to the devs there. And well, maybe that could be something I'm covering. We'll see. For now, World of Warships, Wargame, XCOM, and possibly I'm going to be adding From the Depths because, as mentioned, it is a sort of semi-addiction, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. So that might be another game that I'm going to be adding to this channel. If you have any other games that you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments, but beware, I will not be covering Company of Heroes, I will not be covering Hearts of Iron, I will not be covering Arma. Those games I find myself to be absolutely terrible at, and while that may be amusing to you, I find that I get pissed off quite fast, and that leads to, well, gameplay that's not particularly very fun. So, I hope that you understand my position on that. As for the rest, I'm open to suggestions. With my, well, pretty sizable channel at this stage, I can usually get away with asking for a developer key or a press key, so that I can have a look at a game, cover it on the channel, get some press out on it, and basically help both of us. I get another game to cover on the channel, they get the publicity. And I find that this works rather well. Most devs seem to be happy to do it. So if you have any games that you would like me to cover, let me know, because I might just be able to get a key for it. And with that, that is pretty much the end of this week's War Room. Discussed all I wanted to discuss. Make sure you have a look at that book that I mentioned, The Truth About Relationships, especially if you don't mind questioning basically everything. And that might seem like a lot, but basically questioning the way that our society works, and is that the ideal way for our society to work? Is that even a desirable way for our society to work? Those are the sort of questions that you get asked a lot in his book. So if you're interested in stuff like that, then by all means pick up the book. It's not really that expensive, and it is a great read. Very, very, very funny. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good week, and I'll be seeing you soon with a lot more content.